LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the November 12th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 18 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. The two political comedy sources that I'm taking my clips from, that I like to start off the show with, and actually they're kind of interspersed amongst the show, are a few clips from last night's Saturday Night Live, including the cold open with the Roy Moore, Jeff Sessions discussion that was then later interrupted, or actually started off by Vice President Mike Pence, all played by Saturday Night Live characters, and a couple other clips that I thought were interesting from Saturday Night Live. One clip from Bill Maher's monologue on HBO's Real Time last Friday, and then the rest of the clips, I guess the other 14 clips, come from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States that I will be criticizing and commenting on. I've split things into two main topics, although one of them is kind of a combination topic. The main topic is the Trump failures, and that's split into two topics of Trump's failure in his trip talking to Putin, failure to come to terms with Russian meddling in U.S. elections, assuming that's something that you accept as a fact, and it's not quite sure exactly what Donald Trump accepts as a fact will become clear in the coverage of that topic that I'll get to. That's actually the second topic, and that's interspersed with Trump's also his failure in the elections last Tuesday, which you'll see some commentators call a referendum on Trump, and how it may not bode well for the Republican chances in the 2018 elections. And then the first topic I'm covering is actually the Roy Moore scandal. Republican Senate hopeful in Alabama, Roy Moore, who's gotten into the scandal that's gotten some of us asking the question, like, will Republicans in Alabama vote for anyone rather than a Democrat? Because he's been charged or accused of having an improper relationship with a 14-year-old girl when he was in his 30s, back in the 1979, I think, is when it was supposed to have taken place. And that is actually the topic of the Saturday Night Live cold open. Like I said, it starts with Mike Pence talking to Roy Moore, played by, I think it's Alex Moffat is playing Roy Moore, and Beck Bennet is playing Mike Pence, and then you'll see an appearance of Kate McKinnon playing Attorney General, former Senator from Alabama, Jeff Sessions, who Roy Moore is trying to replace. And this isn't the full clip. I've edited two parts together, and as usual, you can see the entire clip at links down in the video description. I've also put a link down there to my clip list for the entire, if you want to look at my notes for my 18 clips. If you're watching as a recorded show, there'll be time indexes to skip between the two topics down there, and also the bonus Sandy clip. There will be a bonus Sandy clip. I've already loaded it up from earlier today, but as promised, I'm starting with the Saturday Night Live cold open. Jeff Sessions, Mike Pence, both talking to Alabama Senate hopeful Roy Moore in this clip.
Now, I know you're Bannon's guy, but this latest news about you is concerning. Voters in Alabama will never elect someone who's had relations with a minor.
You sure about that?
No. Alabama is quite a place, but we can't take chances.
I mean, Mike, look, it's all lies. I'm not that guy.
Perhaps, Roy, perhaps. But it's hard to convince people that you're not into young girls when you dress like Woody from Toy Story.
Come on, sir. Do we have to do it this way? I mean, can't you call the boss?
Oh, sorry. I'm not going to call Vladimir Putin about this. No. I can't make you do anything, Roy. But I want you to think hard about this. I'll give you a couple minutes to consider.
Ah, dang. What a pickle this is. What am I gonna do?
You're gonna drop out, that's what you're gonna do.
Jeff Sessions, what are you doing in here?
I was just doing what I always do. I'm cooking up night meals for children. But it's good I'm here, because I've been meaning to talk to you. Really.
All right.
Now, Roy, you've been doing some controversial stuff. Wave a gun around on stage, tell folks Muslims shouldn't be allowed in Congress, and that 9/11 was God's punishment for sodomy. I love it. You check a lot of boxes for me, Roy.
Thank you, Jeff.
But, this is really bad. I'm usually the creepiest one in the room, but I look at you and I'm like, oh my God. I got the goose flash.
And actually, last week I was saying how Kate McKinnon kind of steals the scene when she's in a scene, and I thought she was still pretty good there, but I don't know, the cold open, it's not as good with Mike Pence rather than Alec Baldwin as Donald Trump. Beck Bennet, I guess he did a good job, and the writing was actually better, I thought, in the first half there, with the jokes about the, being dressed up as Woody from Toy Story, and when he asked to call the boss, I'm not going to bother Vladimir Putin. And actually, I watched that cold open a few times. I'm trying to figure out if Kate McKinnon, was she hiding in that cabinet the whole time, or did she come through from like a hole behind? Because it seemed almost like she was out of breath, like she was like scrunched up in there too long, but I don't even know if she was in there or if she came in from behind the wall right when she popped out. I don't know, but it seemed like she was a little flustered from the popping out of the cabinet, and it was not the best cold open. So that's my criticism of Saturday Night Live last night. But I want to get to some of the actual news clips, and then, like I said, I will have some more Saturday Night Live and some Bill Maher when I get to the general Trump failure and his Putin stuff, and also I'll be talking about whether this was a good day for the Democrats last Tuesday, and if it shows like a big anti-Trump wave coming next year. That's sort of the second topic. But this topic is what's happening with Roy Moore in Alabama. Before I get to the specific clips on that, though, I have two news stories that actually cover all the topics. But because they also cover Roy Moore and give you a summary of what's going on there, I put them at the very beginning. But it will also cover the Democrats' victories last Tuesday, and some of what Trump has been doing on his foreign trip, starting with the best summary, I think, as usual, comes from NBC's Meet the Press. This is Chuck Todd. You see he refers to 1 year ago to now, which is it's the 1 year anniversary pretty much of Trump's election, which is, you'll see the same beginning they use on the next clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I'll compare the two. They're both a little over 3 minutes long. This is a little bit longer from NBC's Meet the Press, maybe a little better, except for one aspect I'll talk about from the ABC clip after I show the NBC clip, when we talk about it, or we discuss it after we watch together here.
1 week ago today, the momentum seemed to be with the Republicans in Virginia, and Democrats were getting worried that they were facing yet another post-Trump Election Day disappointment. By Friday, Democrats were not only declared slight favorites to take the House next year, but they saw a plausible path in the Senate as well. Let's start with Tuesday. Democratic candidates won the governorships in New Jersey and Virginia and swept races across the country in a clear, at least suburban, repudiation of President Trump. These victories gave Democrats real hope that 2018 could see a wave election that gives them control of the House. And then came the Roy Moore story. On Thursday, the Washington Post reported that Alabama's Republican Senate candidate molested a 14-year-old girl and made sexual advances on 3 other teenagers when he was in his 30s. Staggered Republicans were left wondering, could the Democrat actually win in Alabama and threaten the Republican Senate majority? Would Republicans be better off without Moore in the Senate? Should they support a write-in candidate? Can they force Moore from the race? Yet amid all that Republican hand-wringing, Moore has shown no sign that he'd be willing to get out.
These attacks involve a minor, and they're completely false and untrue.
Republicans are scrambling to distance themselves from Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore, who denies ever meeting then 14-year-old Lee Korfman and says her allegations are completely false.
We do not intend to let the Democrats or the established Republicans or anybody else behind this story stop this campaign.
But in a radio interview with Sean Hannity, Moore did not rule out the possibility that he dated other teenagers when he was in his 30s.
I don't remember ever dating any girl without the permission of her mother.
Do you remember dating girls that young at that time?
Not generally, no.
Senate Republicans have rushed to denounce Moore.
If that's true, I don't believe there'd be any place for him in the U.S. Senate.
If these allegations are true, Roy Moore should step aside.
A growing list of Republicans have pulled their endorsements or called on Moore to drop out of the race altogether. And on Friday, the Senate Republicans' campaign arm withdrew from a joint fundraising agreement with Moore's campaign. But the president's former campaign co-chair in the state is calling the allegations gutter politics.
If these ladies feel like that they're telling the truth, and they need to go ahead and take a lie detector's test.
And though while overseas, President Trump was non-committal to reporters saying, I'd have to look at it and I'd have to see, other Trump allies, like former chief strategist Steve Bannon, are defending Moore.
Until I see additional evidence on Judge Moore, I'm standing with him.
The bombshell report comes after a difficult week for the Republican Party. Democrats won governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia, and more importantly, flipped at least 15 seats in Virginia's House of Delegates, where big gains the last couple of times served as bellwethers for the following year's congressional elections.
In 2005, I was head of the DSCC, and you could smell a wave coming. The results last night smell exactly the same way. Our Republican friends better look out.
This week, 3 more House Republicans announced they will retire, joining a series of House moderates already leaving, after suburban voters around the country rejected Republicans, rattling other party members who fear they could be next.
Was it a referendum on Donald Trump?
I do believe so. And joining me now is a
So you see Chuck Todd there in NBC's Meet the Press end with a Republican admitting it was a referendum on Donald Trump. And although at the beginning it wasn't, they were talking, Chuck Todd was talking about the momentum shift between 1 week ago and today after the Virginia and New Jersey elections and other elections around the country. It's actually this ABC clip that I was giving a slight introduction to before that does the shift from 1 year ago to today based on Donald Trump's election a year ago. And it also covers all the topics that I'm covering, I think. But I think the best coverage from Martha Raddatz on ABC is quoting the actual accusations against Roy Moore in Alabama. I think you saw some of the coverage. Not that the coverage from NBC was bad, and it had that whole thing about like I never dated anyone without asking her mother's permission, which I don't know. That's like justification. That's like something that he thinks is exonerating that is actually pretty damning, I think. And even it turns out on Fox News, they think that's kind of a damning detail. But anyway, I'll get to that in a couple minutes after I show you this Martha Raddatz overall summary of all the topics, like I said, and then the best quoting of the Washington Post article with the accusations against Roy Moore over here.
Good morning. It's been a year since the 2016 election and a year since Republicans were rejoicing at winning majorities that put them in control of both Congress and the White House. Fast forward to this week. The GOP suffering blows in Tuesday's elections, losing ground to the Democrats in what's being seen as a referendum on President Trump, and making the Republican push to pass tax reform and demonstrating their ability to govern more important than ever. But the GOP now has an even greater battle ahead. On Thursday, those troubling allegations emerged in the Washington Post against Alabama Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore, accused of sexual contact with a 14-year-old girl decades ago. The allegations graphic in their detail. Accuser Lee Korfman told the Post Moore took off her shirt and pants and removed his clothes. He touched her over her bra and underpants, she says, and guided her hand to touch him over his underwear. 3 other women also coming forward, saying that Moore pursued them when they were between 16 and 18 years old. Moore was in his 30s. But the candidate, also known to some as the 10 Commandments judge, has fired back with a strong denial, not only calling the accusations false, but painting this as a smear campaign, blaming the media, the Democrats, the Republican establishment, and the women who accused him.
Isn't it strange that after 40 years of constant investigation, people have waited to 4 weeks prior to the general election to bring their complaints? That's not a coincidence. It's an intentional act to stop a campaign.
These accusations coming at a watershed moment as more and more individuals come forward to share their stories of sexual harassment or abuse, implicating Harvey Weinstein, Louis C.K., and Kevin Spacey, among others. Now, the question for Republicans in Washington, Alabama, and all across America, how will they respond? Unless the election is delayed, Roy Moore will be on the ballot next month. Will Republicans choose to support a candidate accused of engaging in sexual misconduct with a minor? Will they denounce him and risk losing a key Senate seat? And if he wins, will they count him among their ranks? It's a defining choice. 42 Republican senators have responded to the allegations against Moore, most of them saying if the allegations are true, he should step aside. And the White House has echoed that same line as the president travels overseas this week. But Trump is promising further comments after he returns to the U.S. So will we see a more decisive response from the president? For more, let's bring in counselor.
For more, she's going to bring in counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. Return of Kellyanne Conway. I put her name in the title. And this next clip, it's a monster Kellyanne Conway clip. It's for the Kellyanne Conway fans out there. It's what we all missed about Kellyanne Conway, her ability to try to avoid and distract. And, you know, it's got your whataboutism in there. And it's got, I guess that's what you would really call your red herrings and all your sophistries and your diversion tactics that we have come to know and love from Kellyanne Conway from way back before Donald Trump even became president of the United States in that fateful election 1 year ago. I couldn't even bring myself to edit this back and forth between Martha Raddatz and Kellyanne Conway, where Kellyanne Conway tries to justify the not calling for Roy Moore to pull out of the election, even though the allegations are disqualifying, but she needs more proof. But, I mean, if any allegation means that someone has to step down, well, that's fine, but that means there are a lot of people who have to step down. And what about what I was talking about a year ago? And I think she's talking about Bill Clinton. She never says Bill Clinton, or maybe she says Clinton at one point here. But anyway, this is almost 7 minutes long, but you can't edit it. You have to see it in its full strength. You have to see the whole winding road that Martha Raddatz brings Kellyanne Conway through, and by the end, what you get is really what you'll see in a much shorter version from Marc Short, no pun intended, who is the chief White House legislative advisor. You'll see in half the time he gives the same information without making everyone feel like they're dirty from dishonesty. And here it is, Kellyanne Conway, Martha Raddatz trying to justify the White House position on Roy Moore as it stands now in this clip.
And one of his top advisors, Kellyanne Conway, her voice among those advising Donald Trump as he decides whether to reject Roy Moore. And good morning, Kellyanne. The Washington Post story is now 3 days old. You've had time to digest it, time to look through it. Do you have any doubt about the veracity of those accusations?
I said very early in this process that the conduct as described should disqualify anyone from serving in public office, and I'll stand by that. The president and others in the Republican Party have made clear that if the allegations are true, this man should step aside. But I've gone farther than that, and I've reflected something the vice president said as well, which is everybody should know that conduct is disqualifying. And Mr. Moore has denied that conduct. I think you've got other people out there talking about what did or did not happen many years ago.
But that goes back to that if we prove this conduct, then he should leave. What is it that has to happen now for you to go into he should step aside?
Well, the one thing I will say is that the president also is not as focused on this as he is his major 13-day trip abroad. And so he made a statement, he's sticking by that statement, but he's not being briefed on this bit by bit because he is very focused on new trade agreements, he's very focused on global cooperation against a nuclearized North Korea, he's very focused on combating terrorism, and
we'll get to that. And we'll get back to that. But let me ask you again, do you have any doubt about the veracity of the accusation?
Martha, I only know what I read, and I take very seriously allegations like this, particularly when they involve somebody who happens to be one of my daughter's ages. I take this seriously. I've tried to be a very loud voice for a very long time.
So you believe the accusers?
Sexual impropriety. I know what I read. I don't know the accusers, and I don't know Judge Moore. But I also want to make sure that we as a nation are not always prosecuting people through the press. He has denied the allegations. I've read the stories. I've heard not the testimony and the evidence, but what people are saying publicly. And I think that what we've all said stands. I came out I was probably the first person in the administration to come out because I happened to be interviewed on a different network about a different topic, tax cuts. And I said, this conduct should be disqualifying. I mean, I look around and I say, is this the best we can do?
But we're still, I mean, Roy Moore says that, too, that conduct like that should be disqualifying. He's just saying he didn't do it. So what's the standard of proof here? It's one thing to say this is terrible conduct. It is terrible conduct. I'm not sure anyone would disagree with you. But the question is, and you are an advisor to the president, you have been following this. What is your standard of proof here? I mean, you either believe the women or you don't. And this isn't a trial.
Well, you said it best. It's not a trial. What do you mean the standard of proof and the evidence?
What does it take for you to say he should resign? What has to happen before you would advise the president to say Roy Moore should step aside?
The president said he should step aside if the allegations are true.
So where does the if lie?
But Martha, hold on. I want to broaden this conversation. It would be a very dangerous precedent for any of us, for any person in this country, to just be cast aside as guilty because of press reports. This is a democracy with a constitutional system that allows us to have a process. So if we're not in trial here, I only know what I read, and what I read is very disturbing, and what I read offends me greatly as a woman, as a mother of 3 young girls.
Understood, but what you're saying essentially is maybe those 4 women are lying?
No, I didn't say that.
We had 4 women who the Post
Martha,
came to.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Okay, I didn't say that. But I also know that credibility has not been imbued on other people when they've tried to raise issues like this based on their political affiliations and based on who they work for. And we know that. There were many accusers over the years. There was much evidence against a former president and very little coverage of that, respectfully. The fact is that on this particular issue, we need to have a serious conversation. But on this one, you're talking about decades-long conduct, allegations in the press. And we already in this conversation have probably spent more time talking about Roy Moore and this than we've talked about a Democratic United States senator who's sitting in a federal courthouse as a criminal defendant in a trial, has been indicted on some serious criminal counts, and we can't get any coverage on it.
And we will be talking about that. We will be talking about that.
I want to be very explicit here. I denounce that conduct. And if the allegations are true, he should step aside. And if the allegations are true about a lot of people, they ought to step aside. And some of them are probably holding office right now.
Let me tell you what Mitt Romney tweeted this Friday. He said, "Innocent until proven guilty is for criminal convictions, not elections. I believe Lee Korfman. Her account is too serious to ignore. Moore is unfit for office and should step aside." So let me ask you one more question on this. Do you believe Lee Korfman?
I don't know Lee Korfman. I believe that both sides are alleging different things. You're asking me.
So that means it goes nowhere.
No, that's not true. That is not true.
How does it go somewhere?
But you're also asking me on behalf of the White House and the president to make a judgment about something when he's on a 13-day trip and spoke very explicitly, as has the vice president, as have I, and as have other top advisors. Let me say it one last time. The conduct as described is not just offensive and disgusting. It disqualifies anyone who's done it from holding public office. So let me go a little step farther. If there's anyone currently in public office who's behaved that way to any girl or any woman, maybe they should step aside, because in a country of 330 million people, we ought to be able to do better than this. I tried to raise this issue a year ago on October 9th. I said explicitly that I had been a victim of people in power, and nobody took me seriously. And you know why? Because of who I worked for, of whose campaign I was managing. I tried to have this conversation a year before everybody else. You want to have this conversation, everybody? Let's have it, but let's be honest about it. It goes far beyond one article in a newspaper. It's in most workplaces.
Let me just, I want to move on to Russia, Kellyanne, but let me say again, there are 4 women who were named and 30 witnesses corroborating it. And
they should have their day. They should speak up.
I think they did speak up.
Right, they should speak up, and they should have their day. The rest of it, you're asking me about political strategy and ballot access in the state of Alabama. That's up to Alabama. I cannot emphatically say enough what I think of the conduct. It's hard to even read these articles.
I know, but you also can't say whether you believe the accusers or not. You just can't. You're not going to go that far. So let's move on to Russia. I want to...
And I'm actually going to have a little bit of her on the Russia thing when I get to that topic. But like I said before, I showed the clip. That was quite a Kellyanne Conway classic diversionary experience. It went on, and I think Martha Raddatz did a fairly good job of keeping the emphasis on the few points that she wanted to either have Kellyanne Conway answer, or at least emphasize to the viewer that she wasn't answering. And as I said before, I showed the clip, this next clip from Meet the Press, where Marc Short, the senior White House legislative advisor, I think his title's something like that anyway, something having to do with advising the White House on legislation. He works in the White House, and he does something having to do with the legislation. And he was over on Meet the Press, and I think he got the same information across and made a couple more interesting points, like the fact that Donald Trump already intervened in the Alabama Senate primary, and he makes it clear that Donald Trump, after he gets back from his important trip, may have more to say about Roy Moore. And I think it shows how you don't have to seem as devious as Kellyanne Conway did in that last clip to get the same information across. Not that Marc Short is some paragon of honesty or virtue, but just compared to Kellyanne Conway, comes across as a choir boy, I guess, over in this clip.
Back again, and congrats on your Hurricanes last night.
Thanks, I am. I'll admit, I'm still on a bit of a high on that.
Oh, and I forgot, I left that little beginning on there because I just hate the way Chuck taught. Why all the sports? Like, multiple sports reference, like irrelevant sports references every program. I guess it's supposed to make him a regular guy. I don't know. You let me know what you think. But anyway, here's that clip again over here.
Back again, and congrats on your Hurricanes last night.
Thanks, I am. I'll admit, I'm still on a bit of a high on that. Let me quickly start with the Roy Moore situation here. You had said you were waiting to see what Mr. Moore had to say when you were asked about this. You have heard Roy Moore's denials. Has he comforted you, or has he made you more skeptical of the situation?
No, Chuck, first let me say that I have a 9-year-old daughter, as you know, and I think that the notion of innocent, defenseless children being molested is one of the most painful thoughts a parent could have. And I think that there's a special place in hell for those who actually perpetrate these crimes. And I think Roy Moore has to do more explaining than he has done so far. But I think we here in Washington have to be careful as well in this. Roy Moore is somebody who graduated from West Point. He served our country in Vietnam. He's been elected multiple times statewide in Alabama. The people in Alabama know Roy Moore better than we do here in D.C. And I think we have to be very cautious, as Senator Toomey said, of allegations that are 40 years old that arise a month before Election Day.
Scott Jennings, who was a former Bush official, you know him well, he said the following. He said, look, it strikes me that the people of Alabama would listen to the president. Basically, he says it's going to take presidential intervention to get possibly either Mr. Moore to step aside or to get this write-in candidacy on board. Is the president prepared to insert himself and to try to fix this situation for the public?
Chuck, he did insert himself. He supported Luther Strange in the primary against Roy Moore. People are forgetting that. This president has been engaged there, but I think as well...
Would he get re-engaged in?
I think the president's obviously been on a very important trip, and when he returns, I think we'll have that conversation, Chuck. But I think that people here in this town have an inflated view of what our views are, and it's important for the people of Alabama to be allowed the chance to discern the truth here and to make the right decision.
Well, so if Alabama certifies that they're okay with Roy Moore, but this allegation, in your mind, he hasn't answered enough questions, and they still send him. Isn't it fair if Senate Republicans, you heard that Senator Toomey there was not ready to say whether he would be comfortable having him seated in the U.S. Senate. Do you understand where he comes from?
Absolutely. If more evidence comes out that can prove that he did this, then sure. By all means, he should be disqualified. But that's a huge if, and I think we have to allow that more facts come out. And Roy Moore
what are the more facts?
Roy Moore has said that this week he plans to come forward with more evidence to support his innocence.
And if that evidence doesn't work, what does that mean? You guys are going to step in. Is this Senate seat that important?
There's no Senate seat more important than the notion of child pedophilia, Chuck. I mean, that's the reality. But having said that, he has not been proven guilty of that, and we have to afford him the chance to defend himself.
Is there any way the president then just keeps us? You're saying the president's not going to get involved? The Luther Strange situation?
I'd said that the president did get involved in the primary, as you know, and he supported somebody other than Roy Moore. I think the president's been on an incredibly important foreign trip. When he returns, I'm sure we'll have the chance to discuss this.
All right, let me move on. Speaking of the...
So, I don't know. It sounds like Trump might still come out against Roy Moore, and Marc Short seem much less willing to muddy the waters than Kellyanne Conway, as I said before I showed that last clip. And I apologize, they did mention that Pat Toomey clip. Senator Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania was interviewed previously, but I wanted to group together the two White House officials and then get to a couple Republicans, right? Just one Republican senator and then one Democratic senator, or two Democratic senators, three Democratic senators. Yeah, I'm going to have, first I'm going to have Pat Toomey, and then I'm going to have three Democratic senators. I'm looking at my clip lists here. Chris Van Hollen, Amy Klobuchar, and Bernie Sanders, all talking about Roy Moore. But first, here's Pat Toomey, who definitely seems to think that, as Chuck Todd pointed out in that last clip, or is not ready to say that Roy Moore should be seated in the Senate, and, thinks that the accusations are more persuasive than the denials. I'll discuss the rest of the clip with you after we watch it together here.
Have you here. Let me start with the Roy Moore situation. Is it worse if Roy Moore loses or wins for Senate Republicans?
Oh, I don't know, Chuck. But I don't know how this is going to turn out. This is just a terrible situation. Nearly 40-year-old allegation. We'll probably never know for sure exactly what happened. But from my point of view, I have to say, I think the accusations have more credibility than the denial. I think it would be best if Roy would just step aside.
He's not going to, it doesn't appear right now he's going to step aside. So I guess the question is, what does the party do? Do you run a write-in? Or do you try to ensure that he doesn't win?
I think a write-in is something we should certainly explore. I think Luther Strange would be a strong candidate for a write-in, but a write-in is very difficult, let's face it. So there's no easy solution to this. I think we should consider a write-in.
If he does win, should the United States Senate seat Roy Moore?
Yeah, we'll wrestle with that if and when the time comes. There's a lot that has to happen before that, Chuck.
So you're not ruling out the idea that you wouldn't want to have him seated as a senator?
Look, I suspect we'll learn more between now and then, Chuck, and I'm not going to, project what we should be doing under that hypothetical.
Let me ask you this, just bigger picture here. Why do you think that there seems to be people are picking a political ideology or a political preference over what is clearly morally repugnant?
I'm not sure who you're referring to. I think Republicans have addressed this in a thoughtful and responsible way, right? We've got a 40-year-old allegation that is unprovable, probably. And despite that, many of us are suggesting that the preponderance of the evidence seems to support the accuser, and therefore many of us, I'll speak for myself, would prefer for Roy to step aside. I think that's a responsible way to approach this.
Why does it, you've said 40-year-old accusation twice. Why does that matter?
It matters because it just raises a question about the credibility. Look, I've said I don't find the denial terribly credible, but when someone waits 40 years before they make an accusation, you know, that raises a question itself. So it's probably not knowable, but there seems to be enough there that it's very disturbing.
Let me move on quickly to something.
So that's a Republican senator from a purple state, Pennsylvania, that can, you know, go either way. And he doesn't want Roy Moore in the Senate. He doesn't want to have to deal with Roy Moore. He wants him to step aside. He thinks the accusations are more credible than the denial. And you heard in the Martha Raddatz summary earlier the specific quotations of the on-the-record accuser in the Washington Post, and you can decide whether you think that story is credible or not, especially with all the corroborating witnesses. But one of the things that I think is most damning is the denial that you sort of heard in the Chuck Todd piece, and then I mentioned that even on Fox News Sunday they found it kind of incredible. Chris Wallace, in his questioning of Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen, actually plays the quote from Sean Hannity. And when I first saw he was playing this quote, I was thinking, oh, it's Fox News. They're going to butcher it so that it makes it sound like Roy Moore isn't impeaching himself, which when he says stuff like, oh, you know, I never took out a girl that young without asking permission of her mother. That's actually like admitting in the denial almost. And actually Chris Wallace in the panel discussion later in a clip I didn't take pretty much says the same thing himself, that he thought that was like one of the worst things he said, and he uses it in the setup to Chris Van Hollen when otherwise he actually does sort of play devil's advocate. And in this clip, and then right after this clip in a part I am not going to show, but after I show you the clip, which is already, like almost 5 minutes long, I'll talk about the Bill Clinton parts that I'm not going to show. But you can see the sparring between Chris Van Hollen and I think Chris Van Hollen takes an interesting position about, like, let's have the people of Alabama vote for the Democrat. Because, well, I'll talk about it with you after we watch that clip together over here.
This week, allegations of sexual misconduct that date back decades surfaced against Alabama Senate candidate Judge Roy Moore. Top Republicans took back endorsements and cut off fundraising efforts for Moore. Alabama's special election is on December 12th, and with the GOP now holding a slim two-vote majority in the Senate, what happens in Alabama could determine the fate of tax reform and the rest of the Trump agenda. Joining us now, Senator Chris Van Hollen, chair of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. Congressman, Roy Moore has flatly denied ever having any improper relationship with teenagers. Sean Hannity asked him about some of the specifics on Friday. Here it is.
Do you remember dating girls that young at that time?
Not generally, no.
But you don't specifically remember having any girlfriend that was in her late teens even at that time?
No, I don't remember that, and I don't remember ever dating any girl without the permission of her mother.
Senator, your reaction?
Well, Chris, I think Roy Moore is unfit for office, but this is going to be a decision, obviously, for the people of Alabama. And the good news for the people of Alabama is they have a clear alternative in Doug Jones, who grew up in Alabama. He became a prosecutor. He's focused on jobs. He's focused on increasing people's wages. He's focused on the things people in Alabama care about, and he's running a good campaign. So I'm not going to get into all these details because it's the people of Alabama who are going to decide. But those who have, people like Senator Bill Cassidy, obviously withdrew their endorsements. So let's let the people of Alabama decide. But the good news, as I said, is they have a great alternative in Doug Jones.
Wait, let me ask you, what do you think now? The polls have tightened considerably. What do you think are the chances that the Democratic candidate, Doug Jones, will actually win in the deep red state of Alabama? And what about the notion that is being discussed of, with these new revelations, the governor of Alabama postponing, delaying the special election next month?
Well, Chris, Doug Jones, again, is talking about all the issues that are important to people there in the state of Alabama. His focus has been on economic issues, kitchen table issues. So, look, we all know that Alabama is a very tough state politically for Democrats, but this is a special situation where we have a great candidate. On the other hand, you have a very, very flawed candidate in Roy Moore, which is why many people are calling upon him to step down. But I'm going to leave this to the people of Alabama. This is their decision. They're getting the facts now, and they need to make a decision based on the records of these two candidates.
One more question on this subject. From the president to Senate Republican leaders, a number of them are saying that Moore should step down if the allegations are proven. Here is fellow Alabama Senator Richard Shelby.
It's a devastating, nasty story. If the revelations, if that's true, I don't believe there'd be any place for him in the U.S. Senate.
Is that reasonable? I understand I don't want you or expect you to get into the specific allegations, but is that reasonable when you have allegations that date back, in some cases, almost 40 years? Let's see some proof.
Well, again, people like Senator Bill Cassidy looked at the facts, and we know what conclusion he drew. My view, Chris, is that Roy Moore was really unfit for the Senate even before these recent revelations. For example, there's ample evidence. This was also reported in the Washington Post, very detailed reporting, that he essentially cheated a charity that he was involved in for his personal private gain. So, again, there are lots of facts out there about these issues, and the people of Alabama will make up their minds. But I hope they will look at the facts because you've got a candidate in Doug Jones who has been sticking to the issues that people really care about. Issues about health care, issues about tax policy that's going to impact the people of Alabama, educating the children in Alabama. Those are going to be the important issues. And I think Doug Jones has shown that he's a candidate who has a record that can actually help Alabama. But that's up to the state to decide.
Understood. Let's talk.
And I think Chris Van Hollen there did an admirable job sticking to his talking points, even though Chris Wallace kept baiting him with, like, facts and that whole thing about I never dated a girl without permission of her mother, which is one of the more bizarre, creepy things that I've ever heard used as a justification. And it's like I said, it's almost a more inculpating than exculpating type of statement. So I don't, whatever. And even Chris Wallace said that later. But Chris Van Hollen stuck to his talking points. Oh, you got to vote for Doug Jones. That's he didn't want to go into the details. Just it's up to the people of Alabama to elect a really good guy like Doug Jones. And that's also the talking point you'll see Amy Klobuchar stick to when she's talking to Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press, although she actually has another good option other than refusing to seat Roy Moore if he's elected by the people of Alabama, which it's possible. It is Alabama, I guess. I don't know what you think about that, but you can let me know what you think about it down in the comment section. I've been reading along the way. I've also noticed I've gotten a few super chat contributions along the way. I guess this later time of night I am like cleaning up on the Swedish kronas. Here, check this out. So that was $20 from Delta Victor Mike. I appreciate. And then two contributions of 20 Swedish kronas. I think between the two of them, that's about $5 US. But I appreciate my Swedish fans out there contributing to the cause. That's inspiring, and so I appreciate all the super chat contributions. But like I said, here's the Amy Klobuchar suggestion, another way to make sure that there isn't a child molester in the Senate, or at least in the Senate, other than refusing to seat him, and of course electing the Democrat Doug Jones in this clip.
You said, I want to go to the Roy Moore story. You said you had faith in the people of Alabama that they would end up voting against Roy Moore and that he wouldn't be a United States Senator. If the state of Alabama does vote for Roy Moore in the United States Senate, do you believe the Senate has a duty to seat him?
We may not have much choice on that, but we do have choice on something else, and that is that you can expel a senator once they're in with 2/3 of the vote after the Ethics Committee, as happened in the past, does an investigation. But there's a step between here, Chuck, and that is that there is an alternative candidate in Doug Jones, former U.S. attorney, great prosecutor, someone who's running on trust with the voters and also health care in Alabama and the real issues that are going to affect the people of that state. So the polls are tightening there, and while it is incredibly important to go after these past allegations, I want people to remember that, in fact, there's another alternative here to Roy Moore, who was removed from the Alabama Supreme Court because he wasn't following the law.
But you're in favor of starting the expulsion process, potentially, if he is elected?
That's one way we could do it, but the other way is for the people of Alabama to look at these two candidates. And yes, I have faith that they're going to look at what happened in these allegations and the fact that there's 30 witnesses and make a decision on someone else.
You know, Roy Moore's been attacking.
So that would be interesting. That would take like all the Democrats plus like half of the Republicans, right? There are 48 Democrats, and so it takes 2/3 of the Senate is 67. Is that possible? Are there enough Republicans who feel queasy about serving with someone who never dated an underage girl without the permission of her mother, or a teenage girl when he was in his 30s without permission of her mother? I don't know. If you read that Washington Post story and some of the follow-up, he apparently gave alcohol to at least one of those 18-year-olds when the drinking age was 19, but I don't know. It's also the hypocrisy because he's such a moralistic guy. He's like the Ten Commandments guy, and in some ways, I think it's like the world has gone into some alternate timeline where it's like some like parody, like unable to parody world, where because it's like in Alabama, the question, I sort of alluded to this in the way I describe the topic down in the video description, but it's like, are there states in the United States where people would rather elect a Republican who's a child molester than vote for a Democrat? I mean, that's almost what this issue has come to. I mean, that's like a joke, right? But that's actually could be the issue on December 12th in the Alabama Senate election if things don't change in one way or the other. Anyway, I have one more Democrat that I promised you, Bernie Sanders. This is just a little over a minute talking about Roy Moore and just how despicable it is. And what's kind of interesting about this is that Bernie Sanders uses Republicans to make his point. And I will talk about that with you after we watch that clip together. We're here.
Let me ask you about this question of Roy Moore, who's running for the Senate in Alabama. You know, when I talk to Democrats, they basically want Republicans to be stuck with this mess. Is that really a good idea? That this isn't this issue and these allegations, and what as a public we do with allegations like this a little bit more than something that has to just be handled as, oh great, it's the other team having a bad time?
I mean, allegations, you're right. Allegations are allegations, and Mr. Moore denies most of the allegations, I gather, not all. But I think and I think Mitt Romney made this point, John McCain made this point, that if you look at the report done by the Washington Post, which is a very thorough report, it was not done by opposition research. I think you can reach the conclusion that what this gentleman did was totally inappropriate and not the kind of behavior that a United States senator should have.
All right, Senator Sanders.
So I think that's like one vote in the Senate. to get rid of Roy Moore if he ends up being elected. But that's actually the last clip I'm going to show on the Roy Moore topic. And before I get to the next topic, so I got Sandy actually sleeping right over there, but I haven't had a time to take a picture of her. But earlier today, I think it was today. Anyway, I did earlier get this quick. It's just a little under 20 seconds. This is one of the things that Sandy often does, the bonus Sandy clip, where Sandy will either bark or growl in her sleep. This is 19 seconds of Sandy barking in her sleep. I think this is either earlier today or yesterday. I can't remember, but it's definitely a daytime. You can see there's sun outside, so... So there you have it, the bonus Sandy clip, Sandy barking in her sleep. That's just for you all and the Sandy fans out there. And now I'm getting to the final topic, the Trump failures, basically the dual Trump failures this last week. One in his meeting with Putin, where he apparently decided to believe Putin about the whole Russia thing. And then also at the end especially, I'll be talking about the Trump failure, the anti-Trump voters in the Tuesday election, and what that says about the Democrats, whether it's a triumph or whether they're just lucky and they don't really have a message. That'll be the two comedy clips I show at the end. It'll be like a dueling comedy clip between Bill Maher's monologue and then this skit from Saturday Night Live that I thought was a good skewer of the Democrats. For those people who think Saturday Night Live only skewers the Republicans, that will actually be the final clip. But the first clip here is also a Saturday Night Live weekend update where they are making fun of Donald Trump and the way he seems to be too gullible when it comes to Vladimir Putin. And that's the first failure, the Putin failure, which is most of the clips I'm going to talk about with you after I show them to you. And this is the 30-second weekend update clip from Saturday Night Live last night here.
First Lady Melania Trump stayed behind in China to visit the Beijing Zoo, while President Trump continued on to Vietnam, where he met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in their best Hillary Clinton blouses. During the meeting, Putin denied meddling in the election, and Trump said he believes him. But keep in mind, Trump also believed his wife when she said she was staying behind to visit the zoo. That's my favorite new excuse for when you don't want to hang out with someone. Oh, man, I'd love to, but I got zoo stuff.
So that was kind of funny. Most of the weekend update jokes weren't that funny. That's why I only took that very brief Colin Jost joke. But what I thought was the best coverage of the Putin flip-flop by President Trump was on CNN State of the Union, where Jake Tapper started with his, always, what is the State of the Union this week? And it's confused by the flip-flop, Trump's flip-flop on whether he believes Putin or whether he believes his own intelligence agencies. And what was really great about what they did on CNN is they had these direct quotes from what Trump said in the previous Air Force One press conference. And they say that the White House won't let them play the audio, even though they have audio. But the extensive quotes, I think, are really important to see exactly what Trump said to begin with and how he attacked our own intelligence agencies and took the word of former KGB agent Vladimir Putin, as reported by Jake Tapper when talking about the State of the Union here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is totally confused. After a week of discipline on his foreign trip in Asia, President Trump unloaded overnight in a series of tweets and comments, hitting his critics as, quote, haters and fools, and saying that he tries so hard to be friends with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un, while also essentially calling Kim Jong-un short and fat. President Trump also appeared to kind of, maybe sort of backtrack on earlier statements in which he seemed to take the word of Russian President Vladimir Putin over American intelligence agencies asserting unequivocally Russian election interference. During a press conference in Vietnam, the president was asked to clarify once and for all whether he believes Russia interfered in the U.S. election. Here's his response.
I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election. As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership. I believe in our intel agencies, our intelligence agencies. I've worked with them very strongly. There weren't 17, as was previously reported. There were actually 4.
Just to be perfectly clear here, President Trump was given yet another chance to definitively state, quote, I believe Russia interfered in the 2016 election, unquote. And again, he did not do so. Now, those comments come after President Trump took aim at America's intelligence community after his meeting with Vladimir Putin. Speaking to reporters on Air Force One in a conversation the White House will not allow us to play the audio from, President Trump says he, quote, really believes Putin means it when he says he didn't meddle, saying, quote, he says, I didn't do that. I think he is very insulted by it. If you want to know the truth, don't forget, all he said is he never did that. He didn't do that. I think he's very insulted by it, which is not a good thing for our country, unquote. And then he went on to suggest the assessment of the U.S. intelligence community was politically motivated. He said, quote, I mean, give me a break. They're political hacks. So you look at it. I mean, you have Brennan, you have Clapper, and you have Comey. Comey's proven now to be a liar, and he's proven to be a leaker. So you look at that, and you have President Putin very strongly, vehemently says he had nothing to do with that. Here to respond directly to the president's comments are 2 of the 4.
And he's talking about Brennan and Clapper, and I'll have their clip in just a minute. But you saw there that Jake Tapper extensively quoted from this interview on Air Force One that Donald Trump gave that the White House won't let them use the audio from, and where he attacks his own intelligence agencies. He says he believes Putin, and that's what he had to walk back. And compare that now to what they did on Fox News Sunday. I'm going to show you the introduction all the way through the report by their reporter Kevin Corke. And you'll see first they start on taxes. They don't even start on either Roy Moore, or they don't start on Roy Moore or the Russia thing, and besides those two, they don't do the Democratic elections. They start on taxes. They barely mention Roy Moore. Then they mention the foreign trip and, Russia controversy, but don't give the details in the intro until they get to the breaking news, even though they must have known about it in the intro. And then you'll notice when they report on the flip-flop that Trump gave, they never really report on anything he said in that Air Force One interview that Jake Tapper quoted from so extensively. They sort of skip over that part. Kevin Corke's report says, that they skip over that part and then get right over to like John McCain's reaction to it without ever really saying anything that he said. So CNN was like miles above Fox News as usual, even though Chris Wallace is supposedly like the straight news reporter, other than Shepard Smith. He's the other straight news reporter on Fox News. But Fox News Sunday is supposedly one of their straight news programs, and I don't think you can see it in that missing piece of this introduction and report from Chris Wallace and Kevin Corke this morning here.
Chris Wallace, the push for tax reform heats up as Republicans face growing political pressure to produce.
This is about actually improving people's lives and making a positive difference.
If they think that this is the bill that they must pass in order to stay in power, they have it all wrong.
We'll discuss what's in the House and Senate plans and whether Republicans have the votes with a point man on tax reform, Republican Chairman Kevin Brady. Then, after sweeping election losses this week, the GOP is now dealing with growing calls for Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore to step aside.
These attacks involve a minor. They're completely false and untrue.
We'll discuss what it means for the special election with Chris Van Hollen, head of the Senate Democrats' campaign arm. Plus, President Trump on the world stage,
taking his America First message abroad.
We are not going to let the United States be taken advantage of anymore.
We'll ask our Sunday panel about the president's trip to Asia and his latest comments about alleged Russian interference in the 2016 election. And our Power Player of the Week, a new high-tech museum for the good book.
The Bible is, love it or hate it, it's just one of the great reads of all time.
All right now on Fox News Sunday.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. We begin with breaking news. President Trump dealing with a new controversy when he seemed to suggest, after meeting with Vladimir Putin, he believes Putin's denial of Russian meddling in the 2016 election. White House correspondent Kevin Corke reports from the Philippines.
As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership. I believe in our intel agencies, our intelligence agencies.
In attempting to clear up confusion over whether he accepted Russian President Vladimir Putin's denials of meddling in the U.S. election last year, President Trump, to the surprise of many, repeated his belief Saturday that Putin was sincerely convinced that there was no meddling.
I think it was very obvious to everybody. I believe that President Putin really feels, and he feels strongly, that he did not meddle in our election. What he believes is what he believes.
However, U.S. intelligence agencies have long since concluded that there was meddling. The president's recalibrated explanation threatened to overshadow his final stop on this five-country Asia tour and followed a firestorm of criticism back home. There's nothing America First about taking the word of a KGB colonel over that of the American intelligence community, said Arizona Senator John McCain in a statement. Trump said he wasn't interested in arguing over meddling and instead wanted to get Russia to work with the U.S. on problems like North Korea, Syria, and Ukraine. The president taking to Twitter to slam his critics, writing, "When will all the haters and fools out there realize that having a good relationship with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing?" In another tweet, the president actually took a swipe, Chris, at the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, who has repeatedly called the 71-year-old commander-in-chief old. The president tweeting, "Why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old when I would never call him short and fat?" The president added that he'd been working hard to become his friend and, despite the dust-up, was holding out hope that that could still happen. Good luck with that. Chris?
Kevin Corke, traveling with...
So you see how that Kevin Corke report there at the end, like I said before I showed it, skipped right over what Trump had said on Air Force One. And the thing is, if you remember back to the Obama administration, what I kept hearing on Fox News over and over again was this false claim that Obama was on this apology tour throughout the world. Even though Obama never really apologized to anyone, but this is so much like an apology tour, and it's so much of an attack, taking the word of the Russian KGB guy against our own intelligence agencies, and the attack on Clapper and Brennan and Comey, especially Clapper. This next clip you'll see Brennan defend Clapper and point out that Donald Trump attacked this Vietnam veteran on Veterans Day on foreign soil. That would have driven them crazy on Fox News, the way they went after Obama for anything even close to that. I'm not the biggest fan of either Brennan or Clapper for reasons I will explain after we watch that clip. This is the CNN State of the Union clip with Jake Tapper I promised you that would follow that Fox News alternate universe clip. I even threw in that Power Player Bible clip that was the icing on the cake. But here, this is Clapper and Brennan responding to being called political hacks by Donald Trump in a conversation with Vladimir Putin.
And also called both of you and FBI Director Comey political hacks. All three of you worked in senior levels in the Obama administration, although you also worked during the Bush administration. How do you respond to the charge?
Well, first of all, he was referring to us as political hacks because he was trying to delegitimize the intelligence community assessment that was done. Jim Clapper, Jim Comey, and John Brennan did not write that assessment. It was written by the professional intelligence officers and law enforcement officers of this great country. Secondly, I feel very honored to be associated with Jim Clapper and Jim Comey in the same category. And considering the source of the criticism, I consider that criticism a badge of honor. And third, I found it particularly reprehensible that on Veterans Day, that Donald Trump would attack and impugn the integrity and the character of Jim Clapper, who served in uniform for 35 years, who responded to the call of his country to go to Vietnam, flew in over 70 combat support missions over Vietnam, and like Senator McCain, really did put his life at risk because of this country's national security. And to impugn the character of somebody like Jim Clapper on Veterans Day, who has dedicated so much of his life to this country, I just find that outrageous, and it's something that I think that Mr. Trump should be ashamed of, but it doesn't seem as though anything he does, he feels any shame whatsoever.
What is the effect of these attacks, not on you two or Jim Comey, but on other people in the FBI, in the CIA, in the NSA, people who are still there, who worked under you and are still there working to try to make the country safer?
First, I have to reciprocate what an honor it has been to serve with the likes of John Brennan and Jim Comey, who are dedicated public servants and have served this country long and well and with great integrity. I think it cannot have a positive impact on the morale of the workforce of the intelligence community, but I do believe in my heart that the men and women of the intelligence community will continue to convey truth to power, even if the power ignores the truth.
At one point...
And it's a little bit rich to hear James Clapper talking about truth. You know, I mentioned before I showed the clip that I'm not necessarily big fans of Brennan and Clapper, who are, you know, big in the surveillance state. I have this Glenn Greenwald book here behind me I haven't shown for you. This is one of the, if you really want to read about the NSA and the surveillance state, you should read this Glenn Greenwald book. James Clapper, you may remember, testified to Ron Wyden before a Senate committee. Ron Wyden asked him before the Edward Snowden revelations whether the NSA and the surveillance state was collecting dossiers or information on millions of Americans, and he rubbed his head and said, well, not wittingly, and that was like a big lie. So I can attack the integrity of James Clapper because it's not Veterans Day anymore, and I'm not on foreign soil, and I'm not the President of the United States. So Donald Trump is, and he did all those things, and so I kind of enjoyed the little mutual, or the attack on Donald Trump, even though I'm not a member of that little mutual admiration society between John Brennan and James Clapper. You can let me know what you think of that down in the comments section. But I want to move on to my second and final Kellyanne Conway clip, also trying to divert attention from what Donald Trump said to Vladimir Putin, like not supporting his own national security apparatus's intelligence agency assessments of what Vladimir Putin did. He's just talking about how, you know, he's a strong leader, and well, this is not the 7 minutes from before. This is only 2 minutes long. Talking to Martha Raddatz this morning on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos here.
I want to get some clarity on President Trump's position on Russia and election interference. He said Saturday on Air Force One that every time he sees Vladimir Putin, Putin says, I didn't do that. And I really believe that when he tells me that, he means it. He tried to clarify that in a press conference overnight. Let's listen.
I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election. As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership. I believe in our intel agencies, our intelligence agencies.
Those two statements seem to contradict each other. Which is it?
No, it's what I can't imagine the president could be more explicit. He said yesterday, as he said today, that when President Putin says it, President Putin means it. he means that they didn't interfere in the election. What the president said
So
is
he
that
thinks he's just delusional, President Putin?
No, he didn't use that word. He said that President Putin believes it. What the president believes is what's most important here. He believes the assessment of the intelligence communities, and he stands by that. He's very respectful of that. Director Pompeo of the CIA said the same thing. And so this president has formed his judgment about that issue based on the intelligence communities in this country. And he also, the president is not the chairman of the Board of Elections in this country. He's the president of the United States. He wants to deal with President Putin and other world leaders, as he is for 2 weeks right now, Martha, on major issues like global security, on trade, perhaps, in other countries, on combating ISIS, on a nuclearized North Korea. Most Americans watching this show and everywhere in this country right now appreciate having a strong leader who's willing to take his counsel from the along with the international community and put the case right to North Korea and say to Putin and say to Xi and say to Abiy and say to others, Men Moon, join with us in making sure the nuclearized North Korea.
Let's talk about what else he said about North Korea. President Trump tweeted this yesterday.
I don't know. I don't think it makes Trump a strong leader that he seems to not be able to say anything negative about Vladimir Putin. Does that make... I don't think so. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I have 2 more of these clips on the whole Trump-Putin commentary and the refusal to really come out strongly and say that Russia meddled in our elections. This next clip is, again, from Marc Short, and it's similar to what you just saw from Kellyanne Conway. Marc Short, remembers, the White House legislative advisor, and he says, it's more important to work on North Korea and Syria than to, I think he keeps saying things like, worry about Russia buying some Facebook ads back in 2016, which is definitely a minimization of the problem that Chuck Todd calls him on in this 2-minute clip over here.
Issue of Russia. On one hand, the president seemed to indicate in the back and forth with reporters on Air Force One that he kind of believed Vladimir Putin's denial. In front of TV cameras, he said, no, he's with the agencies. He wasn't questioning the agencies. What does the president believe? Does he believe in the intelligence assessment that Russia interfered in the 2016 election?
The president concurred with the January 2017 assessment he was provided by the Intelligence Committee. But let's be careful and be straight about what it is the president believes right now. He believes that after a year of investigations of tens of millions of taxpayer dollars, there is zero evidence of any ballot being impacted by Russian interference. What the president is trying to do right now is recognize that the gravest threat that America faces is North Korea developing nuclear weapons. And nuclear weapons in North Korea is a greater threat than Russia buying Facebook ads in America.
You think Russia's interference in our democracy, using American freedom, using the freedom that we have in America, freedom of expression, essentially weaponizing that freedom against the United States, that wasn't a grave threat?
I said that the president has, in fact, signed their sanctions against Russia. He has supported them, and they're being impacted right now. The president does not overlook that. He signed the proclamation that said that there was meddling. We're not denying that or saying it's not important, Chuck. We are saying that if we can get Russia to partner with us to help stop North Korea from developing nuclear weapons, and if we can partner with Russia to provide peace in the godforsaken area of Syria right now, that those are positive developments. And this investigation has gone on without one bit of evidence showing that one ballot was impacted. And it's time for us to actually partner with people to help protect our international interests.
So the president thinks Russia's been punished enough?
I think the president is more interested in figuring out how can we partner with them to help prevent North Korea from developing a nuclear weapon.
Mitch McConnell to Hugh.
So that was Marc Short, White House Director of Legislative Affairs. I think his actual title flashed up there, and that I was having problems with it before, but that's his actual title. And that was, I think, a smoother pivot than what you saw from Kellyanne Conway again. But Kellyanne Conway, I don't know, maybe that's why we haven't been seeing so much of Kellyanne Conway lately. But I have one more clip on this topic before I get to the final 2 dueling political comedy clips on whether Democrats should rejoice on their election victories last Tuesday. But before I get to that, here's Bernie Sanders talking about Trump cozying up to Vladimir Putin and other dictators. You'll see John Dickerson seems try to take Bernie Sanders to task for his tweet about Trump cozying up to dictators. I notice he doesn't mention the Philippines. He tries to say, well, Obama liked all these dictators too, and doesn't mention the Philippines, where that was actually not a good relationship between Obama and what is his name? Not Duarte. It's a whatever. You'll see it's up in this next clip. John Dickerson talking to Bernie Sanders over here.
Burlington, Senator Sanders, you tweeted something this morning about the president and his meetings overseas. You said, quote, President Trump has never met a leader of an authoritarian nation that he didn't like. And you named Russia, China, Saudi Arabia. Is that really fair? President Obama hosted a state dinner with the Chinese president. He was quite solicitous of the Saudi king, and he tried a reset with Putin in Russia. Isn't this what presidents do?
No, you want to make friendships. You want to have good relationships. But at the same time as we have a president attacking the media every day as fake news, encouraging Republican governors around the country to suppress the vote, playing the race card in the sense of trying to divide us up by the color of our skin, by the country that we came from. While he's doing all of these things, he has wonderful things to say about Mr. Putin. The idea that he reports back to us that Mr. Putin said that Russia did not have anything to do in terms of interfering with our elections, and he believes him, while he does not believe the intelligence agencies of the United States of America, is beyond absurd.
We're going to take a break and talk about politics in a minute. I should note that the president did, in fact, say that he did believe the intelligence agencies after his original remarks, so he did clean that up. But we'll be back in a second. We'll talk about other things on the other side of this commercial.
That was a little odd that John Dickerson at the end there came in and fact-checked Bernie Sanders about Donald Trump saying that he believed Putin, that he came back and sort of cleared it up, but actually CBS wasn't that much better than Fox News Sunday. They barely quoted what Donald Trump said on Air Force One, that he basically, they quoted him saying that the Russia story was a Democratic hit job, but they never mentioned that Brennan and Clapper and Comey were political hacks and that he believed Putin, or all they did was fact check Bernie Sanders on that, which that seemed a little excessive when they weren't reporting all those other facts. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And of course, I agree with Bernie Sanders in that clip that Trump has a real authoritarian bent, and he doesn't seem to ever have met a dictator he doesn't like. But like I said, the last two clips I want to show you are on this other Trump failure, or the anti-Trump vote in the elections last Tuesday, Virginia, New Jersey, other places around the country. And I'm going to show two dueling political comedy clips on that. First, from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, where Bill Maher talks about how he feels better this weekend than he has in a year because of all the Democratic victories, and he talks about how easy it is for Democrats because all they have to do is come out and vote, and that's one of his jokes. And I'll talk. This is from the monologue. I will talk about a couple of the jokes and show a clip from Saturday Night Live that I think, like I said, is the dueling clip for this optimism. But it's nice to have a little optimism from Real Time with Bill Maher, Bill's monologue last Friday here.
Let's not bury the lead. I feel better this week than I have in a full year. Democrats finally won some elections. Yeah. The resistance showed up at the polls. New Jersey governorship, Virginia governorships. What happened was Republicans tried a new strategy called Trumpism without Trump. And it backfired horribly. Apparently, Trumpism doesn't do well without Trump. With the Republican base, when you say fuck Mexicans, you have to mean it. Don't phone in your racism. That was their message. And this wasn't just in Virginia that they won in New Jersey. Seattle elected the first lesbian mayor. A Latina single mom is the mayor in Topeka, Kansas. Refugee from Liberia is the mayor in Helena, Montana. The Virginia state legislature could fall, Washington state legislature. And this is all being chalked up to a radical new Democratic strategy called actually voting. Some of the races played out like liberal revenge fantasy. I mean, a shill for the NRA was beaten by the boyfriend of a shooting victim. The Republican in Virginia who wrote the anti-trans bathroom bill was beaten by a trans woman. He tried to tell her where to go to the bathroom, and she said, "Actually, I think I'll be using your office." Yes.
So those were some good optimistic jokes, and I'm glad Bill Maher's feeling good, and there are definitely some good signs from what happened, especially the governor's race in Virginia, where Ed Gillespie tried to be Trump without Trump, as Bill Maher said, and he did really well in like the south west part of Virginia, like the Trump voter areas, but there was such huge turnout in the anti-Trump areas that Ed Gillespie did worse than Trump did in like the suburbs of Washington, D.C., what the Northern Virginia suburbs. That's what there was, a lot of analysis of that. So that's a really good sign for the 2018 elections coming up. But I think Saturday Night Live pointed out some of the weaknesses of Democrats, especially with their leadership, not really being the new dynamic faces and ideas that you might want. And, even if Trump and the Republicans are failing and losing, they say, you can't, one of those political cliches is you can't beat something with nothing. And so the Democrats have to have something. And like I said, this is the dueling political comedy clip. This is an excerpt from this skit that I thought was funny, especially the Larry David parts as Bernie Sanders. But there's also Cecily Strong as Dianne Feinstein, and well, you'll see all the players, and I'll discuss it with you as the final clip tonight for us to watch together here.
And we haven't felt this confident since the day before Trump won.
You love our fresh new ideas delivered by fresh new faces like me, Nancy Pelosi.
And me, Dianne Feinstein. And me, Chuck Schumer.
Y yo soy Tim Kaine. And I'm team player Donna Brazile.
And we also have some great new leaders waiting in the wings, like hot young thing Elizabeth Warren. And also, that's right,
it's Biden time. And I'm still around too.
And together, we're going to end the spirit of divisiveness in this country by focusing on how we won the governor's races in 2 of the 10 states we care about.
And we're really going to listen to people if they don't say what's politically correct. Like these comics out there who think it's okay to make jokes about concentration camps. That guy should rot in hell.
The Dems are back. And we won't stop now because we need another path for our country.
Another vision for America. Another chance for me, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Just one more chance. And maybe one more chance after that.
I thought she was dead.
Anyway, that's worth watching the whole thing. That was one of a few good skits on Saturday Night Live, and I put links down in the video description to all of that. And I think that there's some truth to the lack of new phases and new ideas in the Democratic Party, but hopefully that will resolve by 2020 when they really need some either, well, who knows who it's going to turn out to be. Certainly not going to be Hillary Clinton. That would be too much for any of us to bear, for Hillary Clinton to come out. Well, I guess nothing's impossible, especially in the Trump era. Like I said, we're in some weird alternate universe where things that seem like jokes turn out to be real, like Trump is president, or are the people of Alabama going to elect a pedophile over the Democrat, or whatever. Anyway, those are the clips I picked out. I hope you appreciate that. It took me, it seems to be taking longer lately to pick out all these clips. It's, almost a 90-minute show, 18 clips. Took me maybe 10 hours worth of work in addition to the broadcast here, so I hope you appreciate the time I spent. I appreciate those of you, about 200 of you, who showed up to join me as live viewers. Oh, did you hear that? Maybe you heard that little snoring. You hear snoring in the background? That's Sandy snoring, so that's how much she's enjoying. Oh, you're actually getting some live sleepy barks. You hear that? Live sleepy barks from Sandy to supplement the video I showed you. I don't know if you can hear that to the side there, but I guess those live sleepy barks must mean it's time to finish up the show. I was just saying how much I appreciate the live viewers, the super chat contributors, my patrons on Patreon. You can become a monthly patron by clicking on that link down in the video description. Also, last week I talked about new gifts at the $5 and $10 level. That's something I should be finalizing hopefully by the end of the year. So in 2018 I will be giving out these ACLU constitutions for people who subscribe at the $10 level, and some stickers, I think, for at the $5 level. That I'll finalize that, let you know more about that before the end of the year. And anyway, like I said, I appreciate those who can contribute, those who show up for the live show or the recorded show and just give me supportive comments. Give me a thumbs up down there, share me on social media. All of that helps. And I guess until next week, I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.